Hello there, and welcome to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. This is season 15, episode 41, and we are live across all channels, including Noster with Mr. Floppy, also known as 1440000 bytes, which is the size of a floppy disk. And some people also know him as F/Dev or something like that. And he is best known, at least recently, for his work on bringing privacy to Electrum Wallet. And more recently, if I'm not mistaken, he started working for LayerTwo Labs. So there's a lot to talk about today. So welcome, Mr. Floppy.
Hi everyone.
Okay, so let's talk about CoinJoins. I think the work that you did and is really admirable is the fact that you brought a CoinJoin feature into Electrum Wallet, which is one of the oldest and most respected Bitcoin wallets out there.
Yes, so I've been working on this project called Joinster since 2 years, and initially I created some clients which required a full node, and nobody was willing to test. Then I worked on Electrum plugin because Join Market also had a Electrum plugin, I think in 2015, but it was never maintained later. So I thought that will be an easier way for users to test joins protocol. So it's almost completed. I have a few things to fix, and then it can be used on mainnet.
Okay,
Mhm.
so Joinster is something really interesting because, first of all, it's used by Electrum Wallet, which I guess is the second most tested and used wallet after Bitcoin Core. And secondly, because I think every SPV wallet out there uses some form of Electrum. And the fact that you have this in Electrum, which has been around for, I guess it's been around since 2011 or something, it's a pretty big deal.
I mean, it won't be there as a default plugin in the Electrum wallet, but it, I mean, you can install different plugins and or use plugins in Electrum Wallet, and the founder of Electrum Wallet and everyone, the contributors in Electrum Wallet, they have been really helpful, and they have tried helping me if I was stuck somewhere while trying to build this plugin. So they don't have any issues if somebody is using a plugin which improves privacy for Bitcoin users. But I don't think it will be a default plugin in Electrum Wallet. And there are different reasons for it. One of the reasons is the uh, recent thing which happened with Samurai.
Okay, so how is your implementation of Joinster different from something that's already out there like Wabi Sabi or Whirlpool or other protocols for coin joins?
So it's completely different from Wabi Sabi and Whirlpool because it's not using a centralized coordinator. Uh, People just run the clients and they do a peer-to-peer coin join, and all the communication happens using Noster relays. So all you need is some common relays between the people who are running these clients, and Joinster is just a protocol. Anyone can build different apps which follow the same protocol. It's a simple protocol. You can have certain things which I have not yet implemented, but follow the same protocol, and you'll be using the same liquidity and everything. So it's completely different from centralized coordinators like Wasabi and Samurai. But if you compare with Join Market, uh, there are some differences, like they have a model of makers and takers. In in Joinster, it's a different process. To start with, a user creates a pool. Anybody can create a pool, and those pools are visible uh, like you see orders in any order book. you can see those pools, and any user can join a pool. So you have two options as a user. Either you can create a pool or join a pool. Once you are a part of that pool, you start sharing your PSBT, sign it, and then broadcast the transaction. So that's the whole process. And in the pool, you can decide how many users do you want and what should be the denomination of a pool. Like in Samurai, they had some fixed denominations: 0.001, 0.01, 0.1, and there was one more denominations. But you can decide your own denominations in Joinster. So there's nothing fixed here. Everything is decided by the people who will be running these clients.
That's interesting. So I'm actually curious to know what was the user reception for this and how many people you think actually used your model.
There have been few developers who have tried it on Signet. Some people have reviewed the code, like Super Testnet looked at the code and gave me some suggestions. And recently, he also built a similar thing. So we discussed a lot of things related to CoinJoin and how uh, things can be improved. Then if you look at the users have mostly been excited about using it, but there's not a usable uh, Electrum plugin available right now. Users need to make a lot of changes, and there's one thing which is still not fixed in the Electrum plugin, so it cannot be used on mainnet. So I still have no real feedback from users, but they seem to be excited, and we'll see how it works once it can be used on mainnet.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you can retweet this because it seems like we don't have too many viewers yet, just maybe 100. And it's helpful for more people to know about this. So while you go to X slash Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and hit the retweet button, I just want to say that this is the first episode that we record since Wasabi Wallet shut down their centralized coordinator. ZK Snacks, the company, is gone. Right now, I think there's a project by a few people who used to work on Wasabi, and it's called Ginger, and they started something entirely new. But the most important update out there for Wasabi Wallet is that you can use the same wallet client that you update, and now you can choose your own coordinator, or you can choose one that you like or you trust, or for whatever reason you think is gonna provide the best liquidity and the best anonymity set. And I was going to ask you, what do you think about the situation of coin joins, and what do you think about Wasabi in general?
So Wasabi has some trade-offs if you still want to use it with different coordinators that are running. So first thing is you cannot trust everyone who is behind the coordinators, and it can even be some people from the governments. Or even if you trust the coordinators, uh, you won't have the same liquidity which you had with the ZK Snacks coordinator. And if you compare it with what happens in joins, the Noster relays do not really coordinate the coin join rounds. They do not have any authority of banning any users or banning any UTXOs. They do not control the coin join rounds. They are only used for reading and writing the information that the clients can use in the coin join process. So it's completely different from what happens in Joinster. And these centralized coordinators still can be a target of governments. They would be easy to target. Like most of the coordinators that are running right now, they can already be tracked. Some known developers are running them. So I'm not sure how would this help. They would still be the targets, and they'll have to follow some OPSEC and be completely anonymous if they want to make any difference.
Well, I can argue with you that you speak from a technical point of view, but from a social point of view, if you have a critical point or a critical number of users running coordinators across multiple countries, it's going to become much harder to shut down socially because it will look like this witch hunt that's going on across multiple jurisdictions. And I think to some extent governments don't want this to happen. They're fine with going after a certain group of developers and portray them as criminals, money launderers, or whatever. But if it's just a bunch of non technical people in their basement who run a server, it's going to become more of a social norm and it's going to become more acceptable. And I think that for privacy, it's a net benefit if non technical people who don't know how this is built are running it. It's just like in the case of Tor relays. If you want to become part of the Tor network, you can run a relay. And that should be perfectly normal. It should not be vilified. It should not have any sort of assumptions or implications about what you're doing. However, there is this issue that you are collecting a fee from the CoinJoin rounds, right? And governments can have different interpretations about that and say that you're an illegal money transmitter or whatever they said with the Tornado Cash and with the Samurai guys. By the way, you are part of this war between Wasabi and Samurai, and I guess you have some opinions. So, how would you compare them right now after it's all been said and done, and both of them, at least at the company level, shut down?
I think they did the right thing by shutting down the company or the main coordinator, not the company. I think they are still working on the wallet, uh, and a few developers have started working on a fork of Wasabi called Ginger. So they might have their own plans. I cannot really comment on that. But the point is, even if you have 100 people running these coordinators in different countries around the world, it is still possible to track those people and shut down the coordinators if they have any real liquidity or volume, because this happens with a lot of other things. If you look at botnets, ransomwares, darknet markets, they also are uh, using the same methods. Like they have people in different countries running those servers. But the only thing which governments always go after is, are these tools being used by used in any criminal activities? Do they really have any significant volume and liquidity? If these two things are checked, they might go after any number of centralized coordinators. It doesn't matter which country do they belong, and if all those agencies need to coordinate between themselves. That has been done recently for shutting down ransomwares and a lot of other botnets. So I think in the long term, only things like join market or joinster make sense, but people are free to try different experiments. So let's see how it works. I'm positive. Let's hope nothing goes wrong with it, but it's still possible to shut down these coordinators. That's what I feel.
Yeah, it's good to be pessimistic. It's good to be aware that everyone is socially vulnerable when they do this. But at the same time, if it becomes such a popular activity and it becomes normalized, just as normalized as using a VPN, then it's going to become much harder for governments to justify action against this. Because a lot of honest people need privacy for reasons which do not concern any criminal activity. Maybe that they just withdraw their coins from Coinbase or whatever, Kraken, and they don't want to deal with their blockchain analysis and they want to keep their coins in cold storage without having this corporation know anything about how much they're holding and what their spending habits might be. So there's some legit use cases, and there's always this concern about criminals. But I do recall Greg Maxwell in 2013 when he posted his first proposal, when he basically came up with the name CoinJoin, he said that criminals, if they really want to have privacy with Bitcoin, they're not gonna need any CoinJoin. They can buy their coins directly from the miners because these are the ones that have no spending history, right? They have been mined directly into existence. So they can go there and pay a premium for the coins that have been issued by the miners, and that gives them the best amount of privacy. But for us normal users, when we withdraw, or for example, if I post a donation address on my website and someone who likes the podcast decides to send me a donation, and that donation is from an exchange, I don't want to spend that coins having the identity of the person. And I'm pretty sure that the person sending me this donation doesn't want to be associated with the way that I spend, you know? So Bitcoin has these fungibility problems that I'm describing right here, and it's perfectly normal to desire to have privacy.
Yes, I completely agree with you. But unfortunately, there are some things which we cannot control. So we just need to plan accordingly. Like uh, you can call it adversarial thinking, or call it something else. But uh, I mean, we should plan for the worst scenarios as well.
Yeah, I was going to mention that this podcast is now sponsored by SideShift. If someone offers to pay you in stablecoins and you don't want to hold on that trusted shit, just go to sideshift.ai and swap your stablecoins for Bitcoin or whatever you want. Or if you want to get into buying shitcoins without signing up to some exchange, just go to SideShift and swap your Bitcoin for whatever you want. They support a lot of stuff. They're much cooler than a normal centralized exchange, and they also have integrations with BTC Pay Server, Trezor, and a bunch of other services. So check out sideshift.ai, and thank you guys for sponsoring. And now let's talk more about this privacy topic, because I know that recently you took on a job at LayerTwo Labs, and you're gonna be working, I guess, on the Z sidechain, which is a carbon copy of Zcash. What do you think about LayerTwo Labs, and what are you doing these days?
So I recently, yes, started working with Layer 2 Labs, and the reason is uh, there was some interaction on Twitter with Paul, and I was also looking for a job. Then I think drive chains are already possible with a lot of covenant proposals that people are trying to get activated on Bitcoin since a few years. So I think if drive chain is already possible in a maybe not the same manner like BIP 303.01 does, but kind of similar drive chains are possible with covenants, then why not just try to activate drive chain first and see how the scaling works with these drive chains. And if it doesn't work, uh, we can do the covenants later. So this was the initial thought process, and I've been experimenting with different tools they are working on, and I think they're working on really cool stuff. Yes, they have a Zcash side chain which I used today to deposit some coins and play with them. So I'll be trying to build some tools for them and do some testing, break a few things. Uh, so let's see how it works. But I'm really excited. And yes, I think drive chains, the only problem with drive chains is the perception or the uh, what people think about drive chains in Bitcoin communities. That's the only problem. But I don't see a huge problem if miners get to vote on withdrawals. They 50%, 51% miners can already do a lot of crazy things on Bitcoin if they really want to do that.
We just have to learn to count to 13,000. It seems like not too many people enjoy counting. But I got this message from Paul Stortz, and he likes to send messages for this podcast. And he said, "Are you tired of low quality Bitcoin projects and vaporware? Layer 2 Labs is the real deal. Global scalability and privacy for Bitcoin today. Download at layer2labs.com/download. Don't worry though, I'm sure Lightning will be ready right after we enable 5 or 6 new opcodes and completely rewrite it from scratch. Hey, there's always Fediment so that your friends and family can steal from you. Good luck with that. Layer2labs.com." I was going to ask you, what do you think about the state of Lightning? It seems like we had this single point of failure in terms of scaling because we said this is the solution. There is no other that we should consider. For a few years, it was just Lightning until I guess the ordinals proved the weakness of Lightning under a high fee environment. And now we are suddenly looking into other stuff, including drive chains. And there's still some optimism about it, but it seems like the sentiment has diminished to a great extent. And I'm curious what you think about the state of Lightning.
I think there are a lot of problems with Lightning, and there are only a few people that agree with those problems and trying to fix them or maybe improve it. Other people are completely delusional, and they do not even accept the problems. So for fixing any problem, you first need to accept those and then try to work on different solutions. So the first thing is you have different liquidity requirements. People need to manage those channels and everything. This is not possible, and this is not the best UX for any user who's trying to use Bitcoin. And this becomes a complete mess when you have high fees on chain because of uh, because of any transactions. It can be ordinals or any other usage which is happening on chain that affects how people use Lightning. So it's a complete mess in that case. And I think there's a lot of scope for improvement, and it can be improved if people really have the will to improve it. Else, some people have already moved on to custodial wallets. So that is a kind of acceptance of the failure, because if Lightning really worked and it had the best privacy features that people were promised, then you wouldn't need things like eCash, because people, if you really have all the scaling and everything fine on Lightning, including privacy, then you don't really need eCash or any other custodial solution.
It's interesting to me. I remember when I got my Casa node in January or February of 2019, I was super excited. I ran some channels and then I realized that I can't receive a certain amount of Bitcoin unless I open a channel of that size with someone who can route. And I was thinking, how the hell does this scale, you know? Because you need to open a lot of channels. And if everyone needs to open a channel of, let's say, 0.01 Bitcoin to receive a payment of that size, that's unrealistic. Of course, the obvious answer is that you can go non-custodial. There's splicing. There are a lot of proposals that are interesting on how to do it. But I think this was the primary problem. I think it was the advertising of Lightning as being the scaling solution, as opposed to presenting Lightning as a solution if, for example, you want to send 20 transactions between two parties. It's easier to open this payment channel between them. And instead of paying 20 on-chain transactions, you only pay 2 on each side. So that's only 4 with 20 transactions. I guess you save a lot of block space. If it was presented like this, I think it would be a much better project. But instead, there was a lot of hopium around what it can do.
Yes, completely agree with that. And there's still a lot of hopium, and people do not accept the problems.
I was expecting you to be a bit more vocal about it, but I guess I didn't push the right buttons to trigger you.
No, I mean, I cannot really say the names of different people, but there have been a lot of personal attacks. You cannot say anything bad about Lightning or eCash. Recently, someone called me spook and clown. Uh, I'm not cypherpunk because I've been uh, writing a lot of things about custodial solutions like eCash. So I've been called a lot of things and being involved in a lot of controversial discussions because of the opinions that I have. But I don't want to take any names, but just want to say that there are people in Bitcoin who would never accept the mistakes or the problems that happen while using Lightning, or what are the problems that could happen when you're using a custodial wallet like Cashew or anything, Fediment. So there's no point even discussing anything. I've blocked some people have blocked me, and it's a weird thing. Like in Bitcoin, you have like for a privacy developer like me, you have to stay anonymous. You have to work on things that can improve privacy. Then you have to also listen to the nonsense that people say. So it's a completely new thing for me, which I could never imagine 10 years back. But the only reason I still keep working on this, I'm sorry.
Someone in the chat told me that I'm popping, so I was checking the microphone. Anyway, continue.
Okay. So the only reason I work on this is because I'm passionate about it, and I wouldn't give up because of anything. But there are a lot of problems in not just the software but the people around us.
Yeah, this social layer is super underrated because, of course, the protocol is hard to change, but the people are very easy to manipulate and stir in a certain direction. But I was going to mention that I consider Kale, the creator of Cashew, one of my good friends. I met him last month in Prague, but I can say this to his face that eCash as a pursuit is very nihilistic. It starts from this assumption that you don't need really to make people to onboard via non-custodial solution. You assume that they already embrace the fully custodial future. And you say, okay, so how do I give these people some privacy? It doesn't give them censorship resistance. It doesn't make them sovereign. It just makes them have more privacy. And you can also argue that with privacy, you also get some other benefits around the idea of censorship resistance. Because if you use Wallet of Satoshi or whatever, you can be targeted as someone who registered with this email and uses this client, you know? But if you're using this mint, I was gonna call it a Fediment, but that's something else, then I guess you have just a bit more protections until someone rug pulls. And I did participate. There was this, I don't even know what it's called. I gotta check on my phone. There's this eCash application that I installed on my phone and I used it for testing. And at one point, it was only available on Test Flight, which is the Apple Store testing environment. And when they launched the official App Store application, they did not take into account the previous account. So basically, they rug pulled everyone who was using the testing version. And then you had to start with a new account. And I was a bit pissed off. It was just like $1 worth of Bitcoin that I was sending back and forth to see how this works. But it was still upsetting to see that basically the developers ran away with the money and they continued like nothing happened. And I imagine in the future it's gonna become very common. The rug pulls have come into Bitcoin.
Yes, that is one of the problem with eCash. It is custodial, so the mint can always exit scam and run away with your money. There are other problems like you can mint more than what you have in your reserves. Like if I have one Bitcoin, if I'm running a mint and I have one Bitcoin, I can I can mint eCash more than one Bitcoin. I can uh, even mint more than the supply of Bitcoin. So you are running into the same sort of problems we had earlier with regular banks. You're just using some cryptography and uh, all these fancy things that are possible because of Bitcoin, but it doesn't really improve anything. And since uh, the excuse which everyone gives is they are just trying to improve the custodial wallets, or trying to get people who are using wallet of Satoshi to use these wallets. I think that's a misunderstanding or misconception that people would stop using wallet of Satoshi and come to eCash wallets. Instead, you you are trying to pull some users who were already using Lightning for their regular payments. They are now mostly using eCash, which is a bad thing for Bitcoin. Like we should be increasing the number of people who are using self-custodial wallets. We shouldn't be trying to push them to use custodial wallets. So the the right way to improve things would have been to uh, get better privacy on the self-custodial Lightning wallets, and make the UX so good that people start using those wallets instead of custodial wallets. So, um, but it's a free world, so people are obviously free to experiment and they can build different things. And so I can also have different opinions on these things. And the main problem is it's not just an experiment for now. People have invested a lot of money in the Fedi company. Uh, People have funded a lot of projects in open source that are related to either Cashew or Fedment. So these investors and the users, they do not have the understanding which some developers have. They are now living in a delusional uh, fan, fantasy that these things would scale Bitcoin payments and we do not need any soft forks or any improvements on Bitcoin. So that is the whole problem. If you consider eCash as the only scaling solution and uh, try to push it in everything, like there are people who are trying to use USD on eCash. Then some people have tried discrete log contracts. Some people are trying to push it in mining payouts. So I don't think that is going to work out. I had even suggested one of the use case that eCash might be used on darknet markets, because those are already custodial and people do not mind. Uh, those users already assume that their money might be gone after a few days, so they already take a lot of risk. They are already involved in things which are considered illegal, so they won't mind using some custodial wallets which give them some privacy. But this was not well received, and people consider I'm trying to attack eCash by suggesting that use case. I'm not sure at this point. But the the final point I want to say is people are free to build, people are free to use what they want, but this is not the scaling solution which Bitcoin needs, and I don't think it's the privacy solution as well, which would work in long term.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, but the bottom line is that we should not believe that if we use custodians and somehow add privacy to the idea of custody, we're going to improve anything. Because I think the value proposition of Bitcoin is that it's censorship resistant and it's also unconfiscatable. Once you remove these properties, but you give some other benefits like scalability, low fees, and privacy, it's no longer Bitcoin, it's something else. I believe that the creator of Cashew agrees with this. I spoke with Kale, I interviewed him. You can find this in the previous season of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. He said that eCash is not Bitcoin, and eCash is not a way to scale Bitcoin. It's just a different way to use it. But he doesn't make these claims. He actually said if you want to scale Bitcoin, you increase the block size or do something else that helps it get sidechains. But eCash is not a way to scale Bitcoin. But I want to move the direction into something else because you have some strong opinions about this also. And before that, I got to present the message from Starknet, which is an implementation of ZK Starks. And their message for this podcast is activate Opcat. Because if you do activate Opcat, they can bring this solution of zero knowledge proofs from Ethereum to Bitcoin. And they really want to build on Bitcoin, but they can't right now without Opcat. And I do remember that you posted something that Opcat has some very dangerous implications. And my challenge to you is why don't you use these implications, these attack vectors on Bitcoin Cash or Liquid, because these two chains already have Opcat implemented, so you can actually make some money.
So I don't think it has any features which can be used to steal money from users, but Opcat with a few other opcodes like checksig from stack and maybe other opcodes which we uh, other developers have proposed to get activated, they can be used in combination to build some undesirable applications or things which we do not need on Bitcoin. For example, I had recently shared uh, a link and some information on mailing list, Bitcoin Dev mailing list, which can be used to by the exchanges to do the withdrawal for users, and the user can only claim the withdrawal if they have a public key which will be certified by someone else doing the KYC. So it's a kind of AOPP protocol. If you remember, there was a controversy around some exchanges and wallets started supporting a protocol called AOPP, address ownership proof protocol. So that can be done on chain, and you do not need the off chain signing of messages and everything using Opcat and checksig from stack. So Opcat alone doesn't look really harmful, but it can do a lot of crazy things when you combine it with other opcodes, which people have been proposing in uh, different proposals, which I have recently seen. So we have to be careful, and people, there are people who are smarter than me who can build those things. I've been also trying to uh, work on work with a developer to build drive chain using opcat and opcsfs. So I'd even tweeted a few things which you can already do on bcash, which use opcat with a few other opcodes. They can be used to build AMMs like Uniswap or some DeFi products. So I think it's still an area of research where people have not really tried to break things. Uh, so if I find something which is really undesirable and which can be done using opcat plus a few other opcodes, I'll share it on Twitter mailing list. Sure. And I think one of them would be uh, AMM or maybe drive chain, because people uh, do not want drive chain on Bitcoin. A lot of people do not want drive chain on Bitcoin. But my point with that proof of concept would be, if drive chain is possible with these opcodes, then why not do it with BIP 300 and 301? So let's see how it goes. But I'm researching about these things, and I do interact with a lot of people who can help me build these proof of concepts.
Yeah, it is interesting, and to some degree, it might sound like uncharted territory until you realize that these opcodes have existed on other chains for years. And if you want to try to build something very malicious, as it's being described by some people, I mean, you actually did some testing, but there are people out there who say, we don't know what we don't know. And that's a very absurd argument in and of itself. Of course, you can discover something else along the way. But honestly, people knew that you can do ordinal inscriptions when they activated SegWit and Taproot. I mean, it was part of the threat model, but is it really the argument against? Is it really a way to remove the soft forks and say that Bitcoin was better off without them? Are you going to argue that there are no benefits that came with this and we never had anything that pushed Bitcoin forward and made it more usable? It's delicate. Of course, some people are gonna figure out ways with anything to create malevolent stuff, but it doesn't mean that you as a user are going to pick them and support them. I guess there's also a free market element to all of this. A developer can build anything, but if the users don't make use of it, it's worthless.
Yes, people. There are some people who would oppose any soft fork, and they do not want any improvements on Bitcoin. I am not one of those, but I'm. I think I really liked OpsCTV, which was proposed by Jeremy, but it didn't happen, and it was really simple, which cannot be used to do any crazy things. So if we are going with opcat or any other opcodes, I really want to be careful and do my own research that I really like to do with other things. It's not just with uh, this soft fork. So I'm doing my part, and people can uh, people are people are free to propose anything. People are free to run those clients which activate these soft forks. It's a free market, yes, and I don't think I can stop anything alone myself.
Yeah, there's a conversation to be had about culture, right? Because we can have the most beautiful code that comes into Bitcoin and the best of scaling solutions. But if users are complacent and they say, oh, it's shitcoin technology, it's this, it's that, I don't want to use it, then it's worthless. And we do need to support the people who build really cool stuff. And I do like the idea of builders coming to Bitcoin. It's been about a decade since a lot of people migrated into Ethereum and they started playing with DVM and everything else they can build on it. And now some of them, some of the brightest ones, are working on BitVM. They're working on drive chains. They're working on the zero knowledge proofs. And it's really beautiful that you can discover ways to bring better cryptography because honestly, you can't argue that Bitcoin is perfect or that Satoshi was this alien creature that brought onto us the perfect system because it's using cryptography from the early 2000s. Of course, there's advancements, and of course, you have development, and you must soft fork new stuff into Bitcoin. It's very absurd to assume that it's a final project, and just because you're concerned that there might be some unforeseen consequences, you might stop any progress. At the end of the day, and a lot of people will disagree with me here, it's just software. And of course, it's hard to change, but in the event that you have a catastrophic event, like a 51% attack by miners, like a major crackdown on self custody, you can always hard fork into a new chain, and the users can migrate into that one. There's this social layer that actually controls what is Bitcoin. And we tend to deny it most of the times, but technology is useless in and of itself unless it has people who use it. And Bitcoin is also this MMORPG, that's what I like to call it. It's like this video game where we all play a role and we need to agree on everything and we fight a lot. But it's beautiful. I like it.
Agree. Yes, you know, all the changes that we have made on Bitcoin in last few years, that were only possible because people agreed on the social layer.
I mean, we can also look back to a time when, politically speaking, the project was more centralized. Whatever Gavin Andresen and Mike Hearn and Peter Willey and a bunch of others were proposing was assumed to be correct, and there was only this conversation between them about what kind of upgrade should be run, and the miners trusted them, so they activated anything. Also, the price was lower, the stakes were lower, we didn't have all of these institutional investors, and I guess the devs are not very comfortable with the idea that whatever change they might be bringing, it can have all sorts of consequences on these institutions and they can become legally liable or whatever. Which is why it's a good idea to change at a very slow pace, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't change and you shouldn't experiment with stuff. We have this enormous market of shitcoins where some of them have no merit, like dog with hat or whatever. It's just a stupid meme coin. But some of them are actually layer ones that try stuff. And they take some proposals, they put them on a live network with incentives, and they run them for years and see if anything happens, if anyone comes with an idea to break it. If they break it, there's a bounty for it. And if someone figures out a way to attack it, then we hear it on the news. We see, oh, this happened. Now we know that it's a bad idea. Now we know how it can be improved. It's a beautiful thing that we have this free market. And Bitcoin has the benefit of having to pick the best of ideas. Right now, we're at a point where I think governments caught up with how Bitcoin works and they know how to regulate it. And as we have seen from the United States, we're much more politically vulnerable than we assumed we would be. And that's not great. Which is why I think that bringing some degree of privacy or way for developers to build new stuff with covenants is a net benefit for the network. I tend to think that in order for Bitcoin to remain censorship resistant and also unconfiscatable, we need a degree of privacy because it's worthless if you are technically censorship resistant if the government knows what you're doing and can censor you personally. The censorship happens at the social layer in meat space where you, the user, are identified as sending transactions to someone maybe your government doesn't like. And that shouldn't be the case. That's not the point of Bitcoin. But then again, you have all of these Austrian economists who can LARP all day and say it's perfect money. And the whole point is that you should only have 21 million coins and nothing else matters.
I think nobody is trying to change the supply of Bitcoin except Peter Todd. But and I don't think that that would still be possible. But people who are just trying to improve things that really matter, like scaling and privacy, even those are considered as an attack. Like Jeremy had to face a lot of personal attacks a few years back when he proposed OpsDB, and anyone trying to uh, improve Bitcoin using soft forks is considered an attacker. That is a very bad perception that we have in Bitcoin community, but you cannot do anything about it. Maybe it would change in a few years. Yeah, and there's one more thing which affects these soft forks is because you have to build a different activation client. Nothing can be done in Bitcoin core repository for the soft forks apart from some technical reviews. So the whole process becomes very political, and even the people who do not really know the code and what's happening in that uh, soft fork have very strong opinions about these things. So it becomes really political, and there are certain things which you cannot really avoid, and these things would happen often because Bitcoin isn't a group of small developers and a few users anymore. We have a lot of users and a lot of developers already involved. So you'll have a clash of opinions. People would have different opinions, and hopefully we'll have some agreement, some consensus in a few years, and we'll try to improve Bitcoin uh, because it is a software. It is a soft fork which would need upgrades regularly if it has to survive attacks. It's not possible to just stop upgrading and assume that there would be no people who would try to attack this. There's even a proposal which fixes only the bugs. It's called, I think, the Great uh, Cleanup or something. So
The Great
there are a
Script
lot of
Restoration Project.
no, that is different. There's a consensus cleanup, great cleanup something. I don't remember the exact name, which was proposed by Blue Matt. So in that proposal, there are 2 3 bugs which are really critical and serious, which can be uh, exploited by anyone who has even 10% of hash rate and some technical skills. So the only reason nobody has tried to exploit is because either nobody knows about it or nobody cares about it at this point. But we cannot just assume that governments would always behave like this. We have to be proactive and fix these bugs before they get exploited. So there are certain things which need to be fixed, uh, and there are certain things which need to be improved. And hopefully, I think things would be improved in the next few years.
It's interesting how you speak about the next few years, and I'm curious if you are a fan of this schedule of enabling a new soft fork every 4 years, and if you think that there is one that should be next and something that should be considered in the coming years. Like, what do you think is the highest priority right now?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So there are two layers to my question. The first one concerns this apparent schedule of upgrading Bitcoin with soft forks, with one soft fork every 4 years, if you're a fan of this. And which one do you believe should have priority over the others? And which one should be considered over many more years until we activate it?
I don't think that time matters. There have been soft forks in past which were activated together, or maybe there wasn't enough time between those activations. So whenever you have a certain use case which needs some soft fork or improvements on Bitcoin, and it is ready, it has been reviewed by enough developers, and you have at least some people in community that are supporting uh, the soft fork, and you have some economic nodes supporting the soft fork, I think it should be activated. We shouldn't do the whole political drama for every soft fork, and we shouldn't have a specific time schedule for these soft forks, because these things don't really need to have a specific time schedule. They have to be done uh, when things are really required. Like for Lightning to work, we needed SegWit, and for a lot of things that need to be improved after SegWit, we required Taproot. So we didn't really have a time schedule, but we just followed the whole process. And when things were ready for testing, review, and I think activation just happened. So, and in Taproot case, we even used the speedy trial instead of doing the regular activation of BEP9. So I think it should be case by case, and we should look at each soft fork individually, and we shouldn't compare it with what happened in the past, or we shouldn't have any specific time schedule.
Okay, so you're not a fan of the schedule system, but do you have any favorites? And of course, you might be biased, but which one do you think should be next, and which one should be next in line after it?
I think two, three soft forks that make sense right now are the one which I said about the cleanup, which fixes a lot of bugs. The other one is OpsCTV, and then you have the drive chain BIP 300 and 301. And it depends what other users prefer and what miners want to activate. Uh, these are my preferences, and I don't really think we need OpCat or other things that people are proposing, but they might have a different opinion, and they are free to have those opinions.
Yeah, my opinion is built around how much deving is going to happen. I do like the idea of Bitcoin becoming a hub which attracts developers to build stuff. And it seems like BIP 300 and Upcat are the ones that encourage the most people to come into Bitcoin and build stuff. Of course, OpsCTV is a close second after Upcat, but according to the arguments that I heard from Andrew Polstra, it's just not powerful enough. It's really funny because when it was first proposed a couple of years ago, and Jeremy, I guess, was very bold to go to propose this speedy trial activation, it was presented as an attack on Bitcoin, and people were acting like, oh, it's some sort of CIA psyop that is going to make us activate this too soon. And then people figured out, oh, it's really not bad. It can enable these use cases. It's pretty good. It's well written. People have been building stuff on it. It's really interesting. And it can also enable some layer 2s like Arc, like I'm not sure about drive chains if they can be enabled with CTV, but it can still do some very useful stuff. Opcat, if I'm not mistaken, and according to some writings that I read on Jeremy Rubin's blog, and by the way, Jeremy is on fire lately. He's trying to figure out how to do covenants without a soft fork. But he said that you can do signatures, I think they're called Lamport, and these are quantum resistant. So you can add quantum resistance to Bitcoin with Upcat, which I think is really interesting. It's something that doesn't get discussed very frequently.
Yes, there are some cool things which you can do with Opcat, uh, but I don't think we need quantum resistance at this point. It's not the priority. Uh, Plus, CTV cannot enable drive chains. The other thing is, Jeremy is also working has started researching about functional encryption in last few days, which might, uh, if it becomes possible, which can take a few years. So, if it becomes possible, you might be able to do covenants without soft forks, but they will require some trust assumptions. You'll have to trust the developers for a few things. So there are a lot of research going on related to covenants, and we cannot decide anything at this point what would happen in next 2 years. But hopefully it would resolve something, and we I don't want to see the custodial wallets being used for scaling, and I'm willing to accept anything, including Opcat or any other proposal. But I don't want to see custodial wallets being used for scaling Bitcoin.
We can agree on this much that custodial adoption is the worst kind of adoption. And unfortunately, it's the kind of adoption that's being pushed by the most influential Bitcoin educators, more or less willingly or knowingly. You have Michael Saylor, who says Bitcoin should be like gold, digital gold, and he speaks highly of all of these custodians and ETFs. And then you have the smaller influencers who are like, yeah, this eCash thing is really cool. And I do agree that some of it is cool and some of it is useful, but it doesn't mean it should be the norm. And it doesn't mean that this is the purpose of Bitcoin. And we should surrender this censorship resistance and lack of confiscatability just for some extra adoption from some people who might be pumping our bags. But at this point, I want to thank the 300 plus people who watched this stream up to this point, and also want to tell them about huddling.ch, which is a service based in Switzerland that's going to help you with self custody. So let's say that you're part of a company that wants to add Bitcoin to its balance sheet, or maybe that you're a Bitcoin whale and you don't know how to manage your Bitcoin in a way that removes any threats regarding your own house and the way that you hold your coins. And you go to these guys, and they're going to give you the right kind of consultancy so that you set up a multi sig or whatever you might be needing to cover your specific use case. So if you have a lot of Bitcoin or you're about to become part of an organization that's going to hold a lot of Bitcoin, go to hodling.ch. They're based in Switzerland once again. They have more privacy and they can give you more privacy than the average American company. And unlike services like Casa, they hold no keys. So check them out. And I gotta tell you, Floppy, that we got a bit sidetracked during this conversation because we started from privacy. But when you pitched to me this interview, you sent me a DM on Twitter and you said, let's talk about privacy, but not necessarily about coin joins. I think I did fall into this trap and I started with Joinster and then we got into Wabi Sabi, Whirlpool, and all of these ideas. But we didn't talk too much about Bitcoin privacy specifically. And I guess you have more ideas about what this means and what is interesting to you.
Yes, I think a lot of people are working on trying to improve privacy, and one of those projects which is underestimated and not they're lacking the support, not just from the users but even from people who do the funding and everything, is Mercury Layer. So I think that is one of the implementations of state chains which is more interesting, and it's not custodial like eCash, but you get similar kind of things using state chains. And there are other people who are working on like I went to Bangkok in the same residency. Dan also participated, and he's working on PayJoin. So everything in Bitcoin privacy is looked as a replacement for another. For example, some people consider CoinSwap to be better than CoinJoin, but that's not the case. They have different privacy properties. They have different trade-offs. You cannot replace CoinJoin with CoinSwap. So the thing which I always say is you have to research and look at the trade-offs of each tool and use whatever works for you. And sometimes you can even use multiple tools in combination because they complement each other. For example, if you are coin joining a UTXO, and then after the coin join, you can use Mercury layer, or you can use PayJoin to spend that UTXO. And in the coin join process, if you had any toxic change, you can use that to open a lightning channel, or you can even mint eCash with that if it is a very small amount. So that that makes all these tools a part of the whole process, and they all complement each other. So the only thing which I want to say, which other developers kind of ignore, is you don't need to replace one tool with another, and there's no single tool which is going to solve all the privacy issues for the users at this moment until we have any soft forks. So use them all, and use when you use the right tool for the right purpose. Do not get attached or married to one particular tool or an implementation. Yeah.
Well, it's very easy to get tribal, right? You think that this one implementation is the best and everything else should be discarded. But we forget that the privacy in Bitcoin is very limited because there are, I don't know how many, but let me tell the types of privacy. You have sender privacy, you have receiver privacy, you have network level privacy, and you also have amounts privacy. Amount privacy refers to being able to see every UTXO out there. Bitcoin can only have receiver privacy in the sense that you generate a new address and only the person sending to you is going to know who you are, right? And that one is also optional because you can dox it yourself. If you want to have sender privacy, you have to do coin joins, coin swaps, a lot of privacy techniques to get some deniability about who you might be. But there is no way to get this sort of amounts privacy. And you can get some network level privacy with VPNs, with Tor, with NIM, with all of these ways to change your IP address. But I think the biggest problem is confidentiality of amounts. And there is, I think, a lot of research that goes into this from, I think most people, when they think about confidentiality in Bitcoin, they think about confidential transactions on Liquid. And those have been around, at least the proposal for it, for a decade or so. And it's known for making your transaction sizes very significantly large. So that's one of the reasons why it's not in Bitcoin and you find it on Liquid or something, or on Monero, because they don't care too much about transaction sizes. The priority is to give you better privacy. But I think there's been a lot of research into this. I think the most scalable alternative is the one that you find in Grin. I think Litecoin has a very interesting proposal with the Mimblewimble extension block, which is basically Grin on something that resembles a sidechain, but is actually ran at the protocol level. So you can validate that with your home node. And there's also the zero knowledge proof stuff, which I think is more avant garde. I think it has more potential to become excellent and give us the kind of privacy that's scalable. The promise behind it, if it succeeds, is that we might be able to synchronize nodes within seconds. So on mobile, you no longer have to trust some SPV server with getting data about addresses and transactions. You can just do that with a zero knowledge proof that you verify within seconds, and then you can send and receive in a non custodial way that's actually very cypherpunk. So I have a lot of hopes for this in the coming years, but I think most important is to have the kind of culture that accompanies this mindset of making Bitcoin fungible. Because if you have people complacent about what Bitcoin is and they say it's already perfect, all of this cool stuff that's being developed is going to become useless.
Agree with that. I've not researched enough of Mimblewimble, but there are some developers who kind of support it in Bitcoin. But I'm not sure if there is enough support so that we can.
I'm not sure if you stopped talking or you cut off. Are you still here? I guess he dropped off. Anyway, this conversation about privacy is very important to be had in Bitcoin because if you have amounts that are unequal to each other depending on provenance, it's not really good money. Of course, you have your dollar bills and you have your serial number on the dollar bills, but it's a lot more fungible because the seller, when you go to a store, they're not going to look at the serial number and say, oh, this one comes from this state and therefore I'm not going to accept it. There's this social norm around fungibility that enables merchants to accept dollar bills or any kind of cash, depending on the country, without too much scrutiny or without asking about the origins of the money. And I think it should be the same in Bitcoin. And if we are able to get technological fungibility, we should embrace it because it's what guarantees us the censorship resistance and this idea that nobody can confiscate the funds from us. Bitcoin without privacy is pretty useless because someone else, and it's not just your government, it can be any third party entity. It's this open public ledger. And if you give up on your privacy and everyone else knows how much Bitcoin you have, you're even more of a target for malicious actors. And there are a lot of crazy people out there. So it's good to have a decent degree of privacy. Now, I think you're muted, Mr. Floppy, and that was the issue all along. Can you confirm that you're still here? Because I started this conversation just because I realized you're not responding. You dropped off or something.
Yes, I lost in the connection in between. My Wi-Fi stopped working. So I think I was saying something about uh, privacy is not limited to the blockchain transactions, but it's also related to running your own full node for verifying your transactions. Then you shouldn't be sharing your transaction information on social media, and the basic privacy that you follow for anything else that has to be followed for Bitcoin as well. Otherwise, doing the whole CoinJoin or anything doesn't matter if you're not running your own full node. For example, in Samurai, some users were using their node. So that's not really the right way to use Bitcoin.
Well, what is the right way to use Bitcoin? That's another interesting conversation. There are people who are going to tell you you should only use it for certain payments, but not for minting tokens or whatever.
So, I mean, you can do anything with your transactions. I'm not anyone to object what is the use case or what's the intention behind the transaction. I'm just saying if you're using Bitcoin, the basic thing is to run a full node, and uh, it's not a very big task. You just need to download Bitcoin Core and sync it off for a few days. That's it. That's the only thing you need to use Bitcoin. It already has a built-in wallet if you don't want to play with other wallets. But you can also use other wallets and verify your transactions using the same node. And if you're not using your own node, you'll be using the node which somebody else is running, so they can see all your transactions. So it's not the correct way because it exposes all your transactions, UTXOs, and addresses to somebody else.
Yeah, I think this whole node conversation is very political, and people say, oh, I have a vote because I have a node, or I'm significant. But in reality, the node is not something that is selfless. It's not some sort of way of supporting the network. It's not something that gives you a vote on soft forks or whatever. Your node is your personal sovereignty machine. It's something that lets you have more privacy against the rest of the network and lets you verify transactions yourself. And I think you posted a meme about this a few days ago, and I very much enjoyed it. That I also retweeted it.
Yes, it was related to the same thing. The node is not meant to be a political tool, so that you can uh, try to stop any soft forks. It is actually meant to verify your transactions plus have some privacy so that nobody else can see what are your transactions, what are your UTXOs, what are your addresses. So that is the whole point of running a node. But if you are having a significant economic activity using that node, then you can have some influence in the soft forks, but that's a social layer thing. It's not really a built-in thing in the node. The node software is only used to verify your transactions and get some privacy. That's the only purpose of running a node.
Yeah, I'm very happy that we agree with this because for a number of years, this whole idea of running a node has been politicized. And people assume that when they say that nodes are in control, they assume that it's a democratic system or something where everyone who has a node has the right to vote, but it doesn't work like that. Like, I think we should start a section where we just mention stuff that's a common belief among the average quote unquote pleb, but is in reality not as such. It doesn't work like that.
I think it became political in 2017 or maybe after 2017 uh, because of all the block size wars and some people was signaling using their nodes. They were using the user agent string to support the UASF, and that whole thing became political, and people want to be the heroes in every soft fork. That is one of the reasons they try to support or stop a soft fork. But they forget that in all these political drama and everything, the 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 thing which is important is if a soft fork really improves Bitcoin, there's no point trying to stop it. uh, the efforts should be to try to improve Bitcoin, and the political drama can follow later. Or and plus, the nodes only matter if you have a significant economic activity Otherwise, it's only used for yourself. And even if like Bitcoin has 40, 50 thousand nodes right now, and if even if we had half of these nodes going down tomorrow, the network would still work fine. So it's not really your one or two nodes really do not matter for the network, and it's only used for yourself. The only reason it became political was the UASF thing, which happened in 2017.
And I think it's a bit, I mean, for some people, it's super convenient. They sell you this idea of what Bitcoin is and how it works. It's almost like a lifestyle. You got to do this, you got to do that. And I think narratives are also important in controlling how the evolution of the network is going to happen. And I think Michael Saylor is one of the people who understood this the best and was able to exploit the existing stratum of influencers and surpass them and become the biggest just by understanding how this works. But it's also sad because it's also part of the reason why I still do this show and I don't just quit and enjoy the number go upside of Bitcoin. It's that I think it's useful to speak with developers and really understand how Bitcoin works. Because if you just read books by Knut Svanholm or Giacomo Zucco or whatever, you're not really learning how Bitcoin works. You're just adding up to the reassurance that you're smart, that you invested your money well, that you're gonna be rich in a few years. And that makes you a better promoter of Bitcoin, but it doesn't make you a smarter or more informed promoter of Bitcoin. And if you do understand the limitations of the system, you're more likely to support something that improves it or come up, if you're smart enough, with something that you can use yourself or push yourself. And we should be honest about what Bitcoin is. Because if people buy into this whole self custody cypherpunk dream, but they're still on exchanges or they're using some sort of eCash mint or Fediment, then I guess we failed to a great extent. Because they're gonna assume something that doesn't apply to them because they're very much second class users. And I also believe, and this is the reason why I promote drive chains, I believe that if Bitcoin is this system where early adopters get a much better experience in terms of sovereignty, and everyone else who comes along later is gonna have to onboard via custodians, then Bitcoin is no different from a pyramid scheme. Because you had the early adopters, they got all the advantages, they can afford to transact on chain, and then you have the rest of the world, whom we talk about sometimes in very condescending or humanitarian terms, and we say, oh, they're either poor or they're either underdeveloped. And people talk about this and they say, yeah, but it's fine for them to use custodians because they can't afford to pay on chain fees. But the question is, why should we use custodians as opposed to sidechains, which are non custodial?
I think sidechains uh, that exist right now are also custodial, the federated sidechains. But we need the better sidechains using drive chain uh, that won't be considered custodial. Plus, Michael Saylor has been the biggest disappointment in last few years of Bitcoin. Plus, the people who follow him. Uh, the recent interview or the podcast he did, he said a lot of things which make no sense. And he has also tried to stop funding for some Bitcoin developers, I which is not going to really help in any way.
Well, I think you're being diplomatic here, and if this wasn't broadcast and it wasn't on live stream, you would say much more about the situation. But it sucks, and it's good to speak and be honest about it and understand that you do need to make some improvements to what Bitcoin is. It's also nice that there's a free market of alternatives to Bitcoin. It's beautiful that I'm gonna get crucified for this, but it's nice that Bitcoin Cash exists because it's like a blackmail. Unless we make it work, that one exists. And that one, I think, is just one major nation state adoption away from becoming dominant. If the country of Nigeria suddenly realizes, oh, we need to use this, they're gonna have millions of users. And we do need to improve Bitcoin once again. It's not a complete project, it's not perfect by any metrics, and it's beautiful the way that it is, but more beautiful the way that we can make it become.
You won't believe that while doing the research for opcat and a few other opcodes, uh, the only examples and articles links which I found useful were written by Bitcoin Cash developers. So they are not completely irrelevant. Their research and development would be useful for Bitcoin because they have been experimenting with a lot of stuff that we might need on Bitcoin. For example, Opcat is already active on Bitcoin Cash, so they have tried to build a lot of tools which use Opcat. So such research would always be useful, and we cannot completely say that it's irrelevant for Bitcoin. It's been useful, and it would remain useful. Uh, I think people already cancelled you recently because of your uh, interview with Roger Weir, but uh, I cannot really blame anyone. Bitcoin community has become a very toxic place where you cannot do anything with freedom, but we kind of project ourselves as people who are working on financial freedom, but we do not allow people to have freedom to say something, freedom to even discuss something with people who have different opinions. I think podcasters are like journalists who should remain neutral, and they should always talk to people who have different opinions. So I don't think it was wrong to call Roger Ver and do an interview with him, even if you do not agree with him. You can just listen to what he says and understand his process. So I don't think you did anything wrong. Uh, but that's how Bitcoin community has evolved into.
Well, to a degree, it's funny because I talk about this sometimes. If you learn the playbook and you understand, okay, you have these guys who are like gods among Bitcoiners, and you're supposed to get them on your podcast because they're the most popular. And if you're creative enough to invite them a couple of times and have them LARP about citadels and the future where hyper Bitcoinization is a reality, you're gonna get a lot of views. And when you get a lot of views, you're gonna get sponsors, and they're gonna flock around you and think you're this visionary guy who came up with brilliant ideas that most likely have been discussed on Bitcoin Talk in 2011 or something. But it's really stupid and it's counterproductive. I think there are too many shows where people agree on principle that Bitcoin is perfect and wonderful, and not too many shows that say, okay, we can improve it in this way, and it has these issues that it's fine to mention, you know? I understand the difference between marketing Bitcoin and trying to sell it and talking about what Bitcoin actually is. And it's painful sometimes to realize that I could be making a lot more money just selling Bitcoin, saying, sign up to my ref link and buy your Bitcoin today. It's perfect money, but hold it on your exchange because it's safer than making mistakes or whatever. I could be doing that, you know? It's also funny for me that you and me are able to agree on stuff because at one point you were not a fan of my work and you criticized me for being what I guess you call the wasabi shill. But the fact that we're able to see past that and discuss ideas is something very beautiful, and part of the reason why I'm still doing this podcast and I still enjoy it.
Yes, we did not agree, and we still do not agree on everything. But I think that's the beauty of this conversation, and it should happen with a lot of other conversations in Bitcoin. That even if you do not agree on a few things, you should still be able to have uh, a civil conversation or a healthy conversation on other topics. It is still possible to understand the perspective of other person, but that's not the way most people think in Bitcoin. They are always looking for reasons to cancel each other. So I don't even care at this point. I feel free to write whatever I feel, and I like to uh, write a lot of things on Twitter about anything. I'm not scared of anyone, even if they are uh, Bitcoin core contributor or a very influential person or anything. I don't really care. I've even contributed to Bitcoin core for a few years, and I still do review some pull requests. So I've even seen the politics that goes around internally in Bitcoin core. So there are there are a lot of things which you cannot avoid, and sometimes it's just good to believe in yourself and do whatever you're doing, and be free to express yourself even if people try to stop you. Like recently someone was trying to stop me from writing things about ecash. uh, I was I mean, I respect that person, and he's very influential person in Bitcoin who does funding for a lot of Bitcoin projects. So in the end, when he couldn't have a civil conversation with me and he said a lot of things which were disrespectful, I finally blocked him and I continue to say things I like. Like you cannot stop me from writing things on my Twitter or my blog or any place. I'm free to say what I feel about ecash or any other thing. So if people cannot read a different opinion, then I don't know. Like maybe they do not belong to social media, or they should
They should what?
they should ideally be working for government if they really believe in policing, and they try to stop people uh, from saying things they like, because that's what governments like to do. They try to stop people from uh, freely doing things or
Well, it's much worse than this. I can argue that my government never told me what I can or cannot buy or which software is fine to run on my computer and which one is bad. They never came to my door and said, "Sir, we don't like that you're running a Monero or a Zcash node." But if I type about it on Twitter, they're gonna cancel me. They're gonna jump at me and say, "Oh, you're legitimizing a scam." And honestly, it's just software, man. I'm not saying you should buy the token. I'm not saying this should be in your investment portfolio or whatever. I'm just running software and I'm telling my friends about it. That's all there is to it. But at the same time, I gotta say this because it sounds like we're being condescending and slightly superior to these people who see Bitcoin as some form of religion. I gotta say this: there's Litecoin, and Litecoin, if you're not aware, has been the most used coin for payments on BitPay and Bitrefill and a bunch of payments processors. And I think Litecoin is being used as this medium of exchange where if people hold other coins, they swap into Litecoin and they get on exchanges or ATMs or they pay at payments processors. So some Monero people swap into Litecoin and they use it for this, but the price doesn't go up. And there's a lesson to be learned here because there is no huddle culture in Litecoin. They just use it. And constantly it's just a medium for people to make payments. So, in the absence of this hodl mechanism and high priests who preach that you should be using this in this way, I guess you go to the other side of the spectrum where there's a lot of flow of the money, but there's no conviction in the money itself, and people just use it as a medium. It's almost a stable coin, except that it goes up and down according to some supply and demand mechanics. But we could be in that situation if there was no huddle culture. So I gotta give some credit to the people who came up with this social engineering stuff and they created a cult because to some extent it works and everyone, except for the people who never spend anything and they don't improve their lives in any way, everyone benefits from it.
I think yes, you can have Bitcoin as store of value, but it doesn't really affect your uh, you being a good human, or it doesn't affect your interactions online with other people who are also trying to improve Bitcoin. So I don't think it really matters, because there are some people who are really never involved in controversies. For example, SIPA, Peter Wille has never been involved in any serious controversies, and still he also believes Bitcoin is a store of value. So you can have both opinions and still have some respect for people who say things that you do not like, or different opinions. For example, ordinals, even Peter Willett doesn't believe these things belong on Bitcoin, but since they have some demand, uh, when people try to open the pull requests in Bitcoin to create filters, he was one of the developers who nacked those pull requests. And the reason was, if if the community, if there are certain users who believe these things make sense, they are paying fees for it, then we shouldn't be trying to stop or create a delusion to stop these by adding some filters, because filters would eventually do not work, and there would be some nodes who would be running without these filters. There would be miners who would be accepting these transactions. So you can have different opinions, you can disagree with people, but I think it happens quite often that people try to cancel with no good reason. So yeah.
I don't believe in canceling at all. It's a good idea to turn your back on someone if you think that they've gone crazy or something. But it doesn't mean that they should not be allowed to speak. There's this modern liberal principle, and for the US people listening out there, liberal doesn't mean left wing, it means freedom loving. It's what you call libertarian. But Voltaire said this in, I think it was the 1700s, that I will fight until my last drop of blood for you to be able to say stuff with which I disagree. Which means that we should be all fighting for each other's freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And it's not something that we do. And of course, it's super convenient to converge the culture towards a certain direction that can serve a certain purpose. Centralization, even if it's taboo to call it this in Bitcoin, is efficient and it leads to more efficient systems. They've done it with culture, where they created this Bitcoin maximalist monolith with which most users must agree. They've done it with the Lightning Network when they said, oh, you shouldn't open channels with your Raspberry Pi because it's detrimental to the speed of the network and it should be more efficient as opposed to it being more decentralized. They're doing it with these mints, with eCash stuff. And I guess it also happens with mining to a certain degree, that people agree that they should be joining a pool because it's easier for them to earn a constant revenue. So there is a centralization, but it's not absolute centralization. There is always the option for you to disagree with it and do it your own way. It doesn't mean that it's the most profitable way, but it's something that you can do if you disagree with the system as a whole. But it works, especially if you think about it. You have worked for a few years in developing Bitcoin Core, and you can see that there is some hierarchical centralization in that because people tend to trust when a maintainer says something, and pull requests and everything else can get shut down, or the conversation around them can be stopped just because someone with great influence says that it's not the right time to discuss it or something.
Sure, I agree with that. I was just saying some people need to look at themselves, and there was a recent example I'll share to prove my point or the thing which I'm talking about. Uh, there's this person called Mandrick on Twitter. He said he was looking to donate to some privacy projects or maybe some open source projects, and somebody tagged me and recommended Joinster as one of the projects. So there were like 10 or more than 10 people who said you shouldn't be funding this guy because uh, he supports ordinals, he does not like filters. So I don't think people should be involved in such things. I've never tried to stop funding for anyone for whatever reason, even if I do not agree with them.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's enough room for all of us to have our own microcosm and place where we share our ideas. Doesn't mean that everyone should agree with us, but there should be. I think the best situation comes when people disagree. And this is a way in which I defend the fact that I interviewed Roger. The last time we had a serious debate about scaling and we had infighting among Bitcoiners, we got Segwit and the Lightning Network. This time around, if we keep on disagreeing and we keep on fighting, but for a purpose, I guess we're going to compromise and say, okay, CTV is good or Upcat is good, and BIP 300 is not as bad as we assumed. I think BIP 300 and the idea of drive chains is often vilified in two extremes. The first one is the more obvious one that we have had for a number of years, Liquid and Rootstock, RSK, which are side chains and they do confidential transactions, and the other one does Ethereum smart contracts. And they didn't get that critical mass of people to make them migrate away from the projects that they're trying to replace as Bitcoin sidechains. So the lack of activity is one source of FUD, and people promote that FUD and say it's never going to work because these previous attempts were not successful. But the other extreme is where they say, well, if this becomes too successful, then it's going to mess with miners' incentives. And we're going to get this, it's an imported term, the MEV, the miner extracted value. And we're going to end up in a situation where miners no longer have to announce or be honest about their intentions, and fee prediction and all of this stuff that today we take for granted is gonna become more obscure and less evident because mining pools are gonna make more decisions which are obscure. I can understand both points, but honestly, I don't see anyone talking about a middle ground where it's reasonably successful but not successful enough to be a threat for anything. And people use it, but it's not the only scaling solution that people use, or it's not the only smart contract platform, or it's not the only fungibility layer that people use. It's just one of them, and there is demand for it. And I don't see a reasonable take on it. It's just extremes. And I guess that's part of the current Bitcoin discourse, where people talk about it, but they're very, what's the term for it? They go to slippery slopes. They say if this happens, then the next step is gonna be this one, and it's terrible.
Agree. I've read a lot of criticism about drive chain, mostly from Shinobi, and I think I can discuss those points and write about it in a few days, maybe a blog post or something on mailing list, because most of those things can easily be answered and I don't think drive chains have a significant risk compared to the other crazy proposals that I see. But people have been uh, what do you call, made to believe that it's a very uh, crazy proposal which creates a lot of attack vectors. So people believe the influencers and the articles that are written in different uh, Bitcoin magazine and other publications, but uh, very few people do their own research. If everyone could do their own research, I don't think we would ever uh, have this situation. But that's not possible. Most of the people look at the influencers and trust them for their opinions. So I'll be sharing my opinion in a few days on drive chain. I think it doesn't have any significant risk if we ever activate it. And Paul is very confident about it. Let's see how it works.
Most of the people wear don't trust verify t-shirts and hats, and they look at influencers for opinions. At least, at the very least, if you want to make an informed opinion and you don't know who to follow, at least listen to a show like this, which has all sorts of developers. Listen to what they have to say. Listen to what they have to say, not to the conclusions of influencers like myself. Just listen to them and try to understand what this is about, and maybe make your own theories about what's going on, but just don't look up to high priests and guys who never contributed in any significant way to the Bitcoin project, but they have loud voices, and that's pretty much it. More followers doesn't equal better opinions. And unfortunately, a lot of developers go by the cypherpunks write code mantra and allow the others to express opinions. And when they don't like the opinions, they just try to ignore them. But it's unfortunate. And I'm happy that you're here, and I'm happy that you can be honest about your opinions.
Sure, we nobody is perfect, and I do agree that even I would make mistakes. I have already made mistakes in past, but we just need to accept and move on, and maybe try to improve ourselves and improve Bitcoin. That's the only thing we can do if we are involved in Bitcoin. Everything else remains for the free market to decide, because you cannot really force things. Some things do work, some don't. Yeah, that's it.
When we started this interview, you told me that, oh, it can take 30 minutes, maybe 45, and now we're inching the 2 hour mark. And I just want to thank you for your time and say that I've learned something new today, and I hope that the 500 plus people who listen to this on live stream also learned something new. And I want to ask you, how can people follow your work, and what should they be looking forward to in the coming months from you?
First of all, I want to thank you because nobody else was willing to give me the opportunity to express myself on a podcast. I had already reached out to many other people, but they refused. So I like that you try to give opportunity to people like me who uh, are not considered as one of the influencer uh, that deserves to be on podcast. Second thing is people can contact me on Twitter. It's 144 and 4 times 0 bytes. And I'll be mostly working on Joinster and also working for Layer 2 labs. So there'll be some cool things which I'll share about drive chains. So you can follow everything related to privacy and drive chains on my Twitter. I'm also on Noster. If you search the same username on Noster, you'll find me.
Yeah, I actually tagged you on Noster because I did a live stream on what's it called, Zapster or something. It's zap.stream, and I attempted to do this where on this service you have to pay by the minute for your streams, and it seems like there are two people watching right now. Hi guys, I hope that you enjoy this. It's interesting that I try all of these platforms for live streaming, and it's nice that we have a plurality of opinions. And I gotta tell you this, Mr. Floppy, you thanked me for giving you a platform, but honestly, I don't vet my guests according to their popularity. This is not a popularity contest, but you did the proof of work. You developed a lot of interesting stuff. You worked on some of the projects which I hold in very high regards, like Electrum and Bitcoin Core. And now you're working still on Joinster, and you're also working on Layer 2 labs. To me, this is interesting. It's important. And I also like your opinions on Twitter. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything and I wholeheartedly endorse everything that you might do in the future. And that's another fallacy that people have. It's just that I appreciate your work and I'm happy that you came here and you expressed some opinions. People may disagree, but that's the beauty of it. And that's what we should be doing as opposed to just agreeing on very vague principles that Bitcoin is perfect.
Thank you.
And also thanks to the sponsors. So Wasabi Wallet, they are no longer a company, but I gotta mention them. And there's Sideshift.ai if you want to swap your stable coins for real free market money. There's Huddling.ch. There's Layer 2 Labs, and there's also Starkware slash Starknet. There are two different concepts. But anyway, thank you for sponsoring and thank you for tuning in. I will see you in the next one, which I guess is gonna feature Sergio Damian Lerner, the creator of Rootstock, who's also working on something that's called BitVMX. And I think that's the second functional implementation of BitVM. So stay tuned for more good stuff. And once again, thank you, Mr. Floppy.